Okay, right, brilliant. Well, hi everybody. It's Geraldine here speaking. Thank you so much for your patience today, because I've absolutely no doubt you're very busy and you've got lots of things to do. So just to introduce myself, you all actually know me. I'm working on the Reflect Lab project with our lead partners, Hanover. I've been asked to trial a webinar today and then fill in some feedback. I think quite clearly from what's happened this morning, we're quite clear at the moment on what some of that feedback should already be, because obviously this is something that in the future other lecturers and higher education workers will want to use. And if you're going to use it, we have to make sure that it can be used. So already I think we've got some, we've established some feedback. Okay, I'd like to just introduce who's with us today and the rationale for why we've got the people with us. We've got in the room with me, which was very useful actually, because we were able to see what was happening out there, Carolina Cardas, and she's come all the way from Crewe today to help us with this. Carolina works on the 3 Erasmus Plus projects with me, and she's got a wealth of experience in the topics that we're actually going to work on further down the line. Carolina lectures at Crewe. So her input is twofold really, one for the actual topics we're going to use later on, and also as a lecturer. We've got Mick. Mick, excuse me if I big you up a little bit, Mick, but Mick is what I would call our expert on Reflect Labs, and he's actually done a lot about inquiry-based and project-based learning, and we're really hoping to work a little bit more with Mick as we go along. At the moment, obviously, for those of you that have chatted to me, you know that the projects are in a state of flux at the moment, but we really want to make sure that we've got quite a lot, as much as we can, from Mick. He's what we'd call our resident, expert. We've got Neve Phelan, and the reason why Neve's here today is that she's a very experienced primary school teacher. And the Reflect Lab is aiming to work with teacher trainers, which Neve is. So thank you very much, Neve. It's great to have you here. Unfortunately, we've not got Annette Hargreaves. She's at home, was unable to access this. Now, it would have been great to have Annette because she works in a couple of departments here. And I think that contrast would have been very useful for us. So hopefully she'll be able to log on later. Then there was Rita Long, who works in our psychology department. Why Rita's come along, why she was invited, was we really wanted to hear from somebody else in a different department. Even though this is aimed at higher education, I wanted to know about the sort of experiences that Rita's had, because she came to Manchester from Lancaster University, and it would be very interesting to have that contrast, so we're getting a feel of what's already out there, because it's, of course, this isn't going to be just for Manchester Metropolitan University staff, it's going to be worldwide, and we want it to be accessed easily by everybody. So thank you so much for joining us today. A little bit more about the webinar. It's going to be in 2 parts. It's the Reflect Lab project. Hanover have done the first part of the webinar, and Laguna has done the second part of the webinar. So you're going to see the first part now, which is a portfolio as a useful tool for Reflect Labs. So this part is the portfolio as a useful tool for Reflect Labs. What I must mention, which is very important, this is a very early draft. It's by no means ready for general airing. We've decided to do it in this way because we know we've got expertise here, and we want to use that expertise to help in the formulation of this webinar. So it is what we would call rough around the edges. You've got a general comment sheet that I've sent to you, an evaluation sheet, and it would be very helpful if you could fill in that sheet, and that's going to be used to work on this on the webinar. We're going to work on this webinar. I'm going to do an evaluation from our feedback. another 4 universities will do their evaluations. We'll pull all that together, and our next meeting in Tenerife, we're going to work on it. We're going to work on these on these webinars to make them as best as they possibly can be. So your feedback is really, really important. So thank you for that. So we'll get going with this webinar. Okay, as a quick overview, in this webinar, we're going to be looking at the aims of Reflect Labs, portfolios within that, a theoretical and practical rationale for Reflect Labs, the advantages and disadvantages of portfolios, a checklist for applying portfolios, and the phases of portfolios. I was going to send you the information today, but I thought because it's in draft form, I think I would rather send it when we're further down the line, but you'd be very welcome to it then. But at the moment, I don't think it would be of much use to you. Okay, so the aims of Reflect Labs. Interestingly, as far as I know, I think only Mick really will have worked with these at the moment. So it'll be very interesting, the feedback. I'm expecting some very varied feedback. You're not expected to be an expert at all. Honest feedback from your experience would be most useful. So the Reflect Lab project intends to support lecturers for future teachers, that is, of social science faculties at universities to implement inquiry-based learning. It would be very interesting to hear about your expertise in inquiry-based learning. We did do an initial needs assessment, and the results were very interesting, and I'm sure they'll be available as we progress through this project. For this, the socio-scientific teaching, so learning laboratories, i.e. Reflect Labs, will be developed and tested, and that's what we're doing at the moment. The objective is to establish an innovative course structure which fosters self-directed learning and critical thinking at higher education institutions. Students do autonomous research in Reflect Labs with socio-scientific methods towards pressing political and social issues. There'll be more about that as the project progresses. So the aims of Reflect Labs, its lecturers accompany and support the process of critical thinking and discussion. And as such, the project sets a counterpoint to the widely criticised reduction of learning in higher education to soul transfer knowledge. Interesting. It'd be very interesting for you to have a little think and reflect after this webinar. That what do you actually see as the soul transfer of knowledge? Is that what you're seeing in your institutions? Is that how your institutions teach? What experience have you had? This would be a good time for you to reflect on what you already know and what you see in your own environments. So how is it possible to methodologically reach the goals of the project Reflect Labs? How is this going to happen? So one of the tools we might need is portfolios. And it would be a good idea now, again, to take some time to reflect on how you've used portfolios, if indeed you have used portfolios, how useful you found those portfolios in the past. Because in our projects, they're going to be critical in the working of Reflect Labs. What is a portfolio? A portfolio is an instrument for students to document their self-regulated learning process within a certain time frame. The focus will be on the process of learning, not on the transfer or the rehearsal of knowledge, which is very typical of teaching today. Despite lots of rhetoric, it's still something that we see a lot, and it's very much this is very much in line of the European Union guidelines on higher education, that we are encouraged now to actually teach self-reflection and to encourage students to work in a more critical way. So a holistic approach to the whole process of learning, in contrast to tests and exams. So quite challenging perhaps for some of us that might not be used to working in this way. Okay, so portfolio definition, a simple definition. An e-portfolio is an electronic collection of documents and other objects that support individual claims for what has been learned or archived. That's a simple definition from Mason and Rennie in 2008. So a student is able to collect his or her own essays, articles, presentations, or other materials, videos, audios on a specific topic that he or she is working in. So they're developing what we could call a personal knowledge history, according to Stratman et al. 2009, their own personal knowledge history. Okay, so portfolio. Portfolio, what are the characteristics of a portfolio? So as a method, it has a direct influence on the relationship between the student and lecturer. That relationship is something that you will hear over and over. Okay, it's critical to the success of a Reflect Lab. There is continuous feedback and dialogue. So students analyse and reflect in their own learning process. It's defined by a student's involvement in the selection of topics or topic. Okay, so continuing the characteristics, it stresses self-organised learning for the students, stresses self-assessment, which is something that might challenge existing universities' processes currently, stresses continuous in-depth research, and the student is in control of his or her own learning processes. This would be a time perhaps that you might want to pause and have a little think about why would this be challenging? Do you think it would be challenging for your institution? If not, why isn't it challenging? Have you got these existing processes in place? We could also take time here to think about, can we add to these characteristics? For those of you with experience in the Reflect Lab, I'm sure there are many more characteristics that you can think of. Okay, so a theoretical and practical rationale for Reflect Labs. It takes a constructivist approach to learning. Interestingly, we might all have different definitions of what a constructivist approach is. What it means to you may be very different to what it means to somebody else. This would be a good time again to have a think about what does that mean for you? Are there any feelings or innate thoughts that you may have about a constructive approach to learning? Is it something that you actually are aligned with already? Is it something you want to be aligned with or not? So learning is considered a process where learners actively engage and deconstruct reality. So re-engage and deconstruct. Learning always starts with problem orientation. It's challenging and there are complex tasks. Okay. The results are considered to be unbiased. This might be something that you'd want to discuss further with your students. It causes an intellectual and emotional response by learners and students. And there is sustainability of learning. What does sustainability mean? Why would you want sustainability? That's certainly worth thinking about. Okay, targets for the work in with portfolios. So a selection of results and the systematic reflection and interpretation of these results by learners in order to increase their methodological and learning competence. There is improvement of the quality of learning in seminars, continuous learning instead of selective learning. This again would be a good time to think about, what does continuous learning mean? Is continuous learning a good thing? Is there a place for it in your university? Is there a place for it in your teaching? So there is an improvement of individual assessment of learners. Assessment will be a huge issue within using the portfolios. That would be something that would need a lot of discussion, both within your institution, in your own personal classroom, and also between you and your learners. It's improved self-organised learning and self-assessment of students, and developing a feedback culture between learner, student and lecturer. This is critical for the success of a portfolio and essentially the Reflect Lab. It fosters critical thinking. As part of the Reflect Lab, there's current and very pressing and critical issues that are going to be at the centre of this particular project. In these days, European democracies face many challenges: integration of refugees, nationalism, economic crisis and international crises, and many more. This project develops Reflect Labs, which is an innovative seminar structure for lecturers at universities in order to foster critical, self-regulated learning of students towards pressing political and social issues. Again, this might be a time for you to stop and reflect. Are these issues that you'd recognise? Would these be central to your critical thoughts at the moment about what is happening across Europe and throughout the world generally? This would be a good time to think, would you add other issues to these critical issues? So working with portfolios as a method perfectly fits the criteria for Reflect Labs, and hence will be explained in details in the following chapters. So advantages and disadvantages of portfolios. I think throughout this webinar, you'll already be thinking, what are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? It's very important to highlight these if the success of using webinars and portfolios and a Reflect Lab will work for you. So the focus is on individual performances, strengths and achievements of students, individual that is, as opposed to collective, identifying the needs and performance of individual students. Individual assessment of students without comparison to other students. Feedback and evaluation of a student is based on a holistic working process and hence more objectives. Okay, it's based on self-evaluation, critical. This is something that would need to be discussed fully before you actually start on this process. Students take responsibility for their learning process, challenging indeed for both the lecturer and the student. So the presentation of results and interim results is possible, and it encourages self-reflection. Not something that is innate for all people and would need to be fostered and encouraged, and very skillful to do that. All these advantages are in accordance with the aims of Reflect Labs. I think this would be a good time again for you to pause if you could and think of how these advantages resonate with you. Is it something that's in line with how you want to teach, what you want to teach? Is it in line with your university views? Disadvantages, you may have thought of some disadvantages already, but portfolios might not be an option if the task is too complex and the interest is very low amongst the students. Critical to choose the topic and that students are involved in choosing those topics. A lecturer wants to compare the achievement of students. That wouldn't work with portfolios. Portfolios are based on individual working, individual documentation. It won't work if students and or lecturers are not well prepared to use this method. It's a very skilled process. It won't work again if the interaction between lecturer and student is deficient. We heard the word relationships before, very important in using portfolios. A student might be monitored too much. Again, this is going to inhibit the process. If there's not enough time given to the process and the method, again, the success of using portfolios will be damaged. This would be a good time to think, if you agree or disagree with these disadvantages, would you actually add any more? To totally understand the use of Reflect Labs and portfolios, it's very important to decide how this resonates with your teaching. What are the advantages for you? What are the advantages for your students? What are the advantages for your institutions? And in turn, what are the advantages for society at whole? So the following chapters show how to avoid these disadvantages, critical if they're going to be successful. There is a checklist for applying portfolios that we've provided here. First of all, plan the participation. The student and lecturer plan together as equals. The term equals really needs discussion. That it would be a good time for you to reflect at this point. How do you feel you can be an equal with your students? Choosing an issue in the seminar. Come to an understanding about evaluation, etc. The discussion beforehand is critical. You need to plan the time period. Lecturers should advise shorter periods if students have no experience of using this method. Longer periods if this is something that your institution or your students have used before. A lot of it depends on the topic and the subject, of course. If it's a difficult topic, they may need more support throughout. So, for example, you could do a portfolio for 4 sessions or for 4 weeks, depending on how your seminars are organised at your institutions. It It's essential that you plan your objectives. Objectives can vary, but students always need to document their learning process and reflect this process critically. It's easy to forget the documentation process as you're moving along. It should be clarified which aspects of a topic should be dealt with, perhaps which shouldn't. Think of the structure and the outline. The student should choose his most relevant documents for a portfolio, not everything that has been produced. This encourages reflexivity and self-management. This enables a final evaluation by the lecturer. The objective could be answering a certain question about migration to Europe and come up with a structure containing different aspects of the topic. A student could compile articles, papers, or documentation of sources and answer certain questions which deal with the main topic. Okay, you need to plan the scope. In accordance with other methods applied in a seminar, for example, you might use group discussions, you might use role plays. This needs to be planned in and discussed. It needs to be something that you're already familiar with or are keen to become familiar with. When will results be presented and discussed with other participants and with the lecturer? Will there be a presentation? Who will this presentation be for? Why indeed is there a presentation? The agreed milestones will be documented. The lecturer has to make clear from the beginning how a portfolio is evaluated. This is critical. Again, this would be a good time to think about evaluation at your university, your institution. What are your views on evaluation? How will your students view evaluation? So when you're collecting your evidence, we've got to think about the documentation, no private documents. We've got to think of ethical considerations. This is something that is critical and must be discussed between you and your student. Essays. Will there be presentations, papers, documents, videos, or interviews? We need to think creatively. The student should collect only his strongest material for every chapter. The student and the lecturer have to agree how much is to be presented and available for the final evaluation. For example, the student and the lecturer agree on at least 5 chapters and an output on every chapter of different length and format. I think we're already seeing how much preparation needs to go into these portfolios. Those initial discussions are key to the success. Reflection. Self-reflection of students should be in written form. They need to reflect on the process of learning, reflect on possible improvements, reasoning for the structure of the portfolio and how it's been used, reasoning on their own methods and writings. They must frame open questions. Student and lecturer plan reflections at the beginning. These can easily be overlooked. The manual on how to reflect can be part of every portfolio or even every chapter. There is more discussion in the support section. Okay, evaluation. This may be challenging. It's worthwhile having a think. Why is evaluation challenging? Will it be challenging? Do you think, can you foresee any issues about evaluation when you begin this process? So, evaluation by student and lecturer, it's by both. Qualitative methods will be used for evaluation. This is based on dialogue. Objectives as the benchmark. How will these be documented? How will these be measured, if at all? Evaluation after certain milestones and at the end. This needs to be planned. Evaluating material will stay part of the portfolio. No focus on grades, although this may be necessary. This would be a good time to reflect. Why would this be necessary at your institution? So the presentation, is it to the lecturer, to other students, to other members of the university, to other departments? This needs to be agreed at the beginning because this will influence the documentation and how the documentation is collected. When, and indeed how they present, needs to be discussed. Will it be midway? Will it be both? Will it be at the end? Will it be at the beginning? Just your thoughts. Will different students present at different times? The support available. What sort of support is going to be available to all students? Will there be a timetable, covering sheets? Instructions for students have to be created and available right from the very beginning. There needs to be the possibility to revise a portfolio after an interim evaluation. Agreement on this would be key for students to be able to work on their reflections. So phases of portfolios. Okay, what phases would we expect them to go through? The typical sequence of a portfolio would be the lecturer and the student agree on objectives of the portfolio, so the structure, duration, the purpose, the evaluation criteria. Okay, as we have pointed out before. So the collection, selection and linkage of material. Well, this includes papers, essay articles, videos by a student and by other authors who contribute to a certain topic. Everything can be useful depending on the questions a student wants to focus on. And an important aspect here are reflections and learning diaries as part of this self-evaluation. So, reflection on the learning process. This is the centrepiece of the process. Focus on reflection and the learning process. E-portfolios, will they be used? Do students know how to use them? Have you used them? Have you seen examples of these before? A weblog might be useful. Which objectives do I have? Why did I choose this material? Why did I reach? Why did I fail? Critical in the learning process. What was good? What was bad? Perhaps nothing is bad if it's learning. What would the next steps be? So the presentation of work. Present to the lecturer or the students, as we've already discussed, and the selection of the work that needs to be presented. Assessment of portfolio. We've already discussed this earlier. Not only at the end, but perhaps in the interim, perhaps at the beginning. Although there is a contradiction between the actual idea of the method and the assessment, for pragmatic reasons, it is accepted within this discourse of using portfolios at universities. The phases between each one can be very blurry. They may not be linear. This needs to be understood throughout. It may be useful to document these phases as they are predicted, but make it very clear that throughout they will not necessarily run in a linear motion. We have some on the documentation, excuse me, that will be made available to you. We have some further reading to support you. I now have, this was the presentation that was provided for us by the Hanover University. And as we've said, they've worked on looking at portfolios as a useful tool. I'm now going to move to work, which is part 2 of the webinar. And this was produced for us by Laguna University in Tenerife. Okay, and this is going to look at a few more issues completely separate to the portfolio issue. Okay, so proposed in this discussion are the virtual learning community and inquiry-based learning. We're going to discuss that. Critical reflection in action, or becoming a reflective learner and a reflective lecturer, indeed. Working in small groups for promoting Reflect Labs, face-to-face, and in a virtual learning environment. What good practice are there? Working in small groups, strengths and limits. At the end, we'll have time for some reflection and some time for you to think of questions. It would be useful in terms of our evaluations if you could bear in mind these objectives when you're completing your evaluation for me today. Have we met these objectives? Do we need to supply more information? Do you think these are good objectives? This would be very useful in your evaluations. Okay. Just want to move. So, the virtual learning environment and inquiry-based learning. What are these? First of all, it's based on an informatics infrastructure. Very useful to have a think here. What does that mean? Have you heard this term before? Have you used this term? Is it something you're familiar with? It's useful in sharing handbooks, sharing ideas, or collaborative learning tasks, assessment aspects, collect the learner's data, and to help them make up their reports. all for increasing the efficiency of a learning activity. So, a learning environment. The learning environment is artificial. It's made up of using new technologies, which is trying to simulate a real learning environment. Traditional face-to-face learning situation is being simulated, but with better conditions, using specific tools for sustaining good experiences for all and for each of the learners. A quote from Fee 2009. A virtual learning environment includes A, management systems for learners. It's a good time to think, what would those management systems be? Learning content for these management systems. And C, a virtual classroom with other secondary functions. Again, this information by Fee. Okay, it is a learning space to work on. Okay, so what is a learning space? What do we mean by the learning space? It means that we can quickly access a lot of information. We can quickly access databases. These are ongoing. The learning is ongoing. The resources are ongoing. We can access other authors. We can support a lot of new information and sources and access those. These can be updated at any time. And it also can permit interactions between the learner and the teacher, even though we are not face-to-face in this situation. So it's a learning space. What else is a virtual learning environment? It's a social space, but a distinctive one. According to Dillenberg, a lot of participants who are bringing together by a common educational topic. They're brought together by a common educational topic. Teachers and learners have to be in an interaction. Very clearly, interaction needs to take place. Even though it is self-directed learning for students, there needs to be interaction. There needs to be a learning process. This collaborative way of learning provokes better results and a social construction of knowledge. This would be a good time for us to reflect on what is a social construction of knowledge. What does that mean for you? What does it mean for your university, and what will it mean for your students? It is based on increasing curiosity, natural curiosity, to maintain the learning motivation. It's a space where participants are active and creative agents. We mentioned using movies, animations, sound files, web files. There are learning activities in virtual environments referred to something far more complex than a regular course. Being closer to the project, the student is immersed in their work and in their project. We look at mobile learning. This is a term we may or may not be familiar with. Have a think. Where have you seen mobile learning? Where have you seen it before? Is it something that's used at your universities? Indeed, is it something that your students are using? Put succinctly, a virtual learning environment integrate various tools on the levels of information, communication, collaboration, learning, and learning management. The virtual learning environment overlaps with the physical environment. Although a large part of learning activities take place remotely with the support of digital devices, e-learning, blended learning, and so on. The learning environment includes, in addition to the virtual components based on the use of the computer, laptops, mobile phones, and tablets, and other components such as miscellaneous material, books, resources, papers, a variety of non-coordinating interactions, perhaps face-to-face sometimes, discussions, group discussions. There can be multiple educational activities that are not part of the virtual world, but useful in the learning process. For example, there could be excursions, could be visits, etc. So contemporary technological developments allow the replication and replacement of educational resources, activities and interactions in the virtual space. This would be a time for you to think for yourselves, what are the advantages of the learning space? This would be a good time to pause and have a think. What does it mean for you? How will it benefit you? How does it benefit your students? How does it benefit your university and society at large? Is this a positive environment? Okay. So, even though that virtual learning environments are useful, there are limits which have to be taken into account. There are some areas where the learning in the virtual environment can be more successful than others. The relatively limited impact on the general education process. Learning in the virtual environment may not develop independent learning skills in a relevant way. Learning, but not relevant. The virtual learning environment can limit learners due to access to a small set of activities. The breadth is not there to promote the learning, to promote the engagement, to promote creativity. Standardization of learning objects and tools facilitates access to content in a more focused manner, rather than a learning process that develops specific skills. There are shortcomings, as we've just mentioned. These shortcomings of the learning environments can be compensated, in the opinion of some authors, through the contribution of choice of tools that exist in the virtual 3D environments. It's useful to note virtual 3D components were not originally designed for educational processes. Significant to say that the learning process can be reorientated, very important, by emphasising the perspective methods that place the trainee in the centre of the educational act and which promote constructive, active, problem-solving approaches, inquiry-based learning. For the virtual learning community, we've discussed the environment, now the community. A little bit. Okay, so the definition, what is a virtual learning community? It is a learning group which puts together people who develop common practices and interests, who regularly communicate with each other using a platform or another internet application. Ridings, Geffen, and Arins, 2002. The main characteristics of the virtual communities are, according to Ridings, 2006, virtual communities are usually emerging, that is, that they can form at the very beginning and of the initiative of the members. Some virtual communities are formed at the initiative of organisational groups based on different corporations in order to accomplish a task or work. Usually, virtual communities have no leaders, not in the traditional sense, and dispersed in space and time, forming a complex network of relationships and communication. Members of such a virtual community may be heterogeneous in terms of social, but homogeneous characteristics in terms of attitudes and interests. Communication with these communities is often carried out in written form, which favours participation, as well as the elimination of some bottlenecks in the production of ideas. This would be a good time to reflect. How could this happen? How could this bottleneck appear? What should we do about the bottleneck? Is this a good thing? These communities offer the prospect of preserving online anonymity, which gives all members an equal status, which can buffer the potential for abuse by members. Significant in this age. Leaving a virtual learning community is extremely easy. Anyone can leave it. This might be a good time to ask, is that important? Is it a good thing students can leave this community so easily? Are there any negatives to this? So there are three basic models of a virtual learning community with particular traits. These are, there's a simple learning virtual community, it can be open or closed. The members enjoy some advantages. There are high learning motivations for all members. There's freedom to speak, share your ideas, to support one's own ideas. Opportunities to develop an autonomous learning. Opportunities to interact with colleagues in different ways. A meeting place with people who have the same style of thinking. A meeting place for debating common ideas. Overcoming traditional boundaries and structures within an organisation, facilitating the dissemination of information and good practice. The next, managerial learning communities. These are organised by institutions or organisations, usually have people who play the role of facilitators, that could be tutors, and a community management group. The management group provides technical and administrative support to the virtual learning community. The learning community is supported by certain common learning objectives. Members and facilitators bring together new ideas and approaches. Members of the virtual community develop cooperative learning tasks. This increases the flexibility and communication between members. Thirdly, complex learning communities usually include people with expertise in a specific field and are set up to provide support and guidance on some areas considered important. These communities have the acknowledgement or developing strategies and opening up trends in their fields, according to Lewis and Allen 2005. It is well known that if we want to design a virtual learning community, we have to take into account the basic elements: resource management, different types of learning activities, support for learners, and assessment issues. We're coming towards the end of the process now, the end of the webinar. It would be interesting for you to have a little think about some issues that will come up using virtual learning environments and virtual learning communities. Top-down decision-making. How will this impact? Will it impact? Materials drive and instruction. How will that take place? What will it look like? What does it mean to you? What should it look like? Decontextualize from practice. What does this mean? Is this good? Should we decontextualize from practice? A one-size-fits-all attitude, both for the topic, both for the student, both for the tutor, both for institutions, and even nations. Focus on skills or programs. Where will this focus be? Overall, inquiry-based and probability-based learning. Where does this fit into your institution and you? So, how to promote an inquiry-based learning in a small group activity? Well, working successfully with others is an increasingly important student skill, something that they may need for life. They will need for life. Group work presents different challenges from those of individual study. At least 4 areas contribute to successful group work: having a goal focus, the roles, the processes, and the interactions. For inquiry-based learning, online group activities raise some different issues that face-to-face activities do not. For a student, it is useful to know that actually others can help you to become a successful learner. Learning does not necessarily happen in isolation. For a reflective lecture, 3 steps for promoting inquiry-based learning and group activities. 1, preparation before the teaching activity. 2, coordination in teaching in action, using a critical thinking didactic model. Common meaning of learning, reflection. For critical reflection in action, this would be a good time to think, where have you used this? Is it something you do use? Is it something that you've heard before? Is it part of your processes? Is it part of your institution? Collaborative challenges and thinking. How common is that? Is it something that you do naturally? Constructs of knowledge through inquiry. Provides opportunity to build rapport and relationships with lecturers or facilitators. Focus on scientific or professional ways of thinking and doing. Provides tutorial or coaching actions. Strengths. Build on communities among group members, critical to the very topics that we're going to discuss in this Reflect Lab. Provides opportunity to use language of teaching, use other language of teaching, language that we've not traditionally used. It provides the opportunity to create distributed knowledge. It's founded on socio-linguistic construction of knowledge. A discussion would be useful here. What do we mean by socio-linguistic construction of knowledge? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for your institution? What will it mean for your students? What should it mean for your students? And it challenges teacher-students' pre-existing beliefs. Some suggestions here. Provides opportunity to select the group's membership. Ensure that the group have some opportunity to have some say in this. If not, what is your rationale? How is the group chosen? There needs to be time to complete tasks, time that is timetabled. Students need to be given that time, given that permission to use that time. It is difficult to find a common time for groups to meet outside of class. What can we do about this? Perhaps their own virtual learning community. A well-designed inquiry-based learning and problem-based learning plan helps to keep everyone focused and everybody on go. Having a learning activity checklist is a rational plan of action. This would be useful to see some examples here. Have you seen some examples before? This would be useful to find some collective useful resources that perhaps your university may already have, or certainly not if online. Okay, so about the tools for the Reflect Lab. What tools are we going to use? Okay, some suggestions here. What are the tools for critical reflection, inquiry-based learning, or a Reflect Lab activity? There are pedagogical resources that you may already use in your teaching. These tools can be found already in your structures, within your class, perhaps in your methods of instruction, perhaps already in your assessment and in your accountability. Consider how your tools act to 1. Help generate knowledge through inquiry. 2. Allow for social collaborative interactions. 3. How they honour multiple perspectives. And 4. How they hold students accountable for participation. Benefits and drawbacks of small group assignments. Maguire and Edmondson, 2001, analysed the evaluation aspects related with learning in small groups. The reason was how to take individual responsibility for the grade achieved when you are involved in group work. Indeed, a very difficult discussion. Many institutions will have had these discussions before. Perhaps you have. The following benefits and drawbacks were revealed. Benefits were often others can contribute different knowledge and perspectives. Could this cause a clash? Is this beneficial? What can the drawbacks be? You might allocate tasks according to the skills within the group. That's beneficial. Working with others can increase motivation for inquiry-based learning or problem-based learning. Perhaps a preference then not to work on their own. You learn through discussion and debate. Working with others can be positive and fun experiences. You can be more adventurous in how you choose to tackle the assignments than you might be by yourself. Working in small groups is a real life skill, hugely beneficial for when the students are working or in their social lives. Group assignments may provide an opportunity for socialising and for friendship, helping each other to develop. Drawbacks. What might these drawbacks be? It would be useful here to spend some time yourself to think about what the drawbacks are, what you envisage them to be. Can you think of any others that I'm about to mention, further to the ones I'm about to mention? Firstly, there's a loss of personal control, both for the lecturer and for the student. There may be reliance on people, students, who may not know, or indeed may know but not like each other. Group members may have different standards, expectations, and abilities. There is a danger of underachieving unless somebody pulls their weight. The grading the students work on is very difficult or work towards. Project activity is more difficult. You have to be well prepared for the learning process. Not knowing everyone may preclude skill optimization, maybe not identifying what skills that are already there. Consensus decisions may be difficult on different phases of inquiry-based learning and time-consuming to reach. Project management can become slow and unwieldy. The group may make more risky decisions than you actually want, and that actually may be inadvisable. This might be good, or it could have implications for individuals and the group. There may be personality clashes. Sometimes working with others can decrease motivation. Teachers can become an important coordinator of learning. So there are non-traditional learning strategies in small groups which promote problem-based learning. Some examples of these you may already use. It would be useful to discuss or have time to discuss with your fellow colleagues and even students which of these strategies they've used already, which do you prefer. Actually, which suit the process that you're going to go through, which suit your topics, which suit your projects. Have you used think, pair, share? Have you used Let Me Have the Last Word? Or have you used the De Bono, Thinking Hats? Just some questions before we finish. How do these exercises support critical reflection? What are the challenges? How could these exercises be modified or improved to suit your processes? It would be useful to spend time to discuss what are some other activities to support critical reflections. We finish here with some references and future reading that I would advise you to go through if you want to know more about these processes. To finish there, I'd just like to reiterate this is very much a draft webinar. It's been designed for you to be able to comment and to help us further develop this webinar. It would be fantastic if you would please fill in the evaluation that I've sent to you. If you could get that to me as soon as possible. It can remain anonymous if you wish, and then I'm going to collect them and I'm going to write a 2-page report, which will be then sent to our leaders in Hanover, and we're going to then disseminate that information to help us put these webinars into practice. I would like to reiterate that this is very much in the draft early evaluation process, so we look forward to inviting you when the webinars are finished. I'd like to thank you again, Chris, Mick, if you're still there, thank you so much. I'm sorry about the delay before, but this can all be part of the evaluation process. Carolina, thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to hearing your evaluations. Thank you for actually being here. That was very helpful. Thank you to Neve. I still hope that you're there. Really looking forward to hearing your evaluations. Annette and Rita, you're going to watch this later and give me your feedback then. So thank you, everybody. Please do email me if you've got any further comments, if you would like to discuss anything, and I very much look forward to working with you in the future. Bye-bye. I feel switched off. I don't know how to. When finished, stop broadcasting. I don't know how to do it. Oops. So you were supposed to go.